What happens when your HOA raises fees over too many cars, only to find out you own the entire neighborhood? For me, it started with a Lamborghini in my driveway and ended with a revelation that turned everything upside down. Hello, beautiful people. Before we dive into this story, if HOA Karens drive you crazy too, you're in the right place. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Just one click makes a huge difference. Now let's get into it. It was a bright summer morning, and I had just finished unpacking my latest acquisition, a custom-painted orange and yellow Lamborghini parked proudly in my driveway. As I stepped outside to admire my new ride, I couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just any car. It was a symbol of freedom, success, and the culmination of years of hard work. To me, it represented everything I loved about life: speed, style, and the thrill of owning something truly unique. But little did I know, my joy would be short-lived. As I stood admiring my Lamborghini, a black sedan pulled up to the curb across the street. Out stepped Ms. Eleanor Ella Carter, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a woman known for her strict adherence to rules and regulations. Clutching a clipboard, she marched toward me with an air of authority. "Good morning," she said curtly, adjusting her glasses. "I'm afraid I need to inform you that your vehicle violates Article 4, Section 7 of the HOA Guidelines. Specifically, the clause regarding approved vehicles. All such modifications must be pre-approved by the board." I blinked, momentarily stunned. "Are you serious? This is my property. How can anyone object to what I park in my own driveway?" Ms. Carter sighed, flipping through the pages of her clipboard. "Be that as it may, the rules exist to maintain aesthetic consistency throughout the neighborhood. If these modifications aren't removed within 24 hours, we'll have no choice but to issue fines." My frustration bubbled beneath the surface. I glanced at my Lamborghini, its vibrant colors gleaming in the sunlight. How could anyone see this as a problem? Wasn't individuality more important than arbitrary rules? "I'm sorry, but I can't do that," I replied firmly. "This is my driveway, my property, and my decision. Surely, there's some way we can find common ground." Ms. Carter shook her head. "Rules are rules. I suggest you reconsider before things escalate further." As she walked back to her car, I felt a surge of anger bubbling inside me. She didn't understand. I owned this neighborhood. My family had built Willow Creek from scratch decades ago, and now they were trying to dictate what I could or couldn't do on my own land. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I made a decision. I wasn't going to back down, not without a fight. This wasn't just about my Lamborghini anymore. It was about standing up for what mattered. And if the HOA wanted a war, they were going to get one. What happens when a homeowner stands up to an HOA that doesn't know who they're dealing with? For me, it started with a Lamborghini, but it quickly turned into a battle for property rights that would redefine my neighborhood. The days following Ms. Carter's visit were a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, frustration, and disbelief swirled inside me as I grappled with the absurdity of the situation. How could an organization meant to protect property values dictate something as personal as what I parked in my own driveway? It felt like a betrayal, not just of my freedom, but of the principles my family had built Willow Creek on. But I wasn't the type to let injustice slide. I decided to educate myself about the HOA's guidelines and local housing laws. After hours of research, I discovered a crucial detail. While the HOA could regulate aesthetics, they couldn't outright ban vehicles that complied with zoning laws and building codes, as long as those vehicles served a legitimate purpose. Armed with this knowledge, I drafted a polite but firm letter to the board, arguing that my Lamborghini was not only functional but also aligned with broader efforts to promote individuality and creativity. "I understand the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards," I wrote. "However, my Lamborghini represents freedom and success, values that should be celebrated, not punished. It complies with all applicable regulations and should be considered an asset to the community." I sent the letter off, hoping for a positive response. But deep down, I knew it was unlikely. The HOA prided itself on uniformity, and exceptions, even well-reasoned ones, were rarely granted. As the days passed, I noticed subtle changes in my interactions with neighbors. Some avoided eye contact when passing my house, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing conflict. Others, however, stopped by to express quiet support. One afternoon, a young couple named Alex and Jamie approached me while I was admiring my Lamborghini. "We think what you're doing is amazing," Jamie said softly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was listening. "We've always wanted to customize our cars too, but we were too scared of breaking the rules. You're inspiring us to push back." I smiled, touched by their words. For the first time since the confrontation with Ms. Carter, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't alone in this fight. Encouraged by Alex and Jamie's words, I decided to take my campaign to the next level. I reached out to local advocacy groups specializing in property rights and homeownership, inviting them to join my cause. Within days, photos of my Lamborghini began appearing on social media platforms, accompanied by captions praising my resilience and condemning the HOA's actions. "This is what innovation looks like," one advocate wrote beneath a photo of the car. "Why punish someone for embracing individuality?" The post quickly gained traction, sparking conversations about the absurdity of HOA restrictions and the importance of supporting personal freedoms. Neighbors who had previously remained silent started chiming in, sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's rigid rules. "Why can't we have custom cars like this?" one resident commented. "It's practical and stylish." Another added, "If you get fined, I'll paint my car too. Enough is enough." Meanwhile, Ms. Carter grew increasingly agitated. She called an emergency meeting of the HOA board, accusing me of deliberately trying to undermine their authority. "We cannot allow this kind of behavior to continue," she declared. "If we let them get away with it, everyone will start thinking they can do whatever they want." The board agreed to send me a formal warning, reminding me of the impending fine if I didn't comply. But instead of intimidating me, the letter only strengthened my resolve. I realized that the HOA's resistance was rooted in fear, a fear of losing control. And I was determined to prove that change was possible. That weekend, I hosted a small gathering in my driveway, inviting neighbors to tour my Lamborghini and learn about its significance. I handed out brochures about property rights and encouraged others to consider eco-friendly alternatives. By the end of the day, several residents had pledged to join my cause, vowing to challenge the HOA's outdated policies. As I stood among my supporters, watching children explore the car and neighbors exchange tips on customization, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my Lamborghini anymore. It was about creating a movement that celebrated individuality, creativity, and the power of community. But I also knew the road ahead would be difficult. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, and the battle was far from over. Still, I refused to let fear dictate my choices. If anything, the growing support only fueled my determination to see this through. The gathering in my driveway had been a turning point. For the first time, neighbors who had previously stayed silent began speaking out against the HOA's restrictive rules. Inspired by my courage, they started customizing their own vehicles, some painting them bold colors, others installing custom rims or decals. Within weeks, Willow Creek looked less like a cookie-cutter suburb and more like a hub of creativity and self-expression. But Ms. Carter wasn't ready to concede. She saw the growing movement as a direct threat to her authority, and she wasn't going down without a fight. Determined to squash the rebellion, she called another emergency HOA meeting, this time with a plan to escalate the situation. She proposed fining not only me but also any homeowner caught displaying unapproved modifications on their vehicles. Her argument? Uniformity was non-negotiable, and allowing exceptions would set a dangerous precedent. The proposal sparked outrage among residents. During the meeting, several homeowners stood up to challenge Ms. Carter, citing studies about the benefits of individuality and self-expression. One resident, a retired mechanic named Tom, pointed out that the HOA's actions might violate local laws intended to protect property rights. Another neighbor shared a story about how his late father had always dreamed of owning a custom-painted car, a dream he refused to abandon despite the HOA's restrictions. Despite the backlash, Ms. Carter refused to budge. She argued that the HOA's primary responsibility was maintaining property values, not promoting individual hobbies or creativity. If we allow one person to break the rules, she warned, we'll have chaos. But I wasn't backing down either. I knew that winning this battle required more than just local support. It needed national attention. So, I reached out to a prominent automotive advocate named Emily Green, whose YouTube channel had millions of subscribers. Emily was immediately intrigued by my story and agreed to visit Willow Creek to document the conflict. When Emily arrived, she spent hours filming my Lamborghini, interviewing me, and even staging a mock confrontation with Ms. Carter. The resulting video, titled, "How One Homeowner Fought Back Against an Overbearing HOA," went viral almost instantly. It showcased my journey from proud owner to rebel, highlighting the absurdity of the HOA's rules and the broader implications of my actions. Within days, the video had garnered millions of views, sparking conversations across social media platforms. Hashtags like #CustomCarRevolution and #HOAFreedom trended globally, drawing attention from news outlets, influencers, and even politicians. Suddenly, my struggle wasn't just about my Lamborghini, it was part of a larger debate about homeowners' rights, creativity, and the role of HOAs in modern communities. Meanwhile, the HOA found itself under unprecedented scrutiny. Local reporters flooded Willow Creek, eager to cover the story. Neighbors who had initially remained neutral now came forward to share their own experiences with unreasonable HOA rules. One woman recounted how she'd been fined for parking a vintage car in her driveway instead of keeping it in the garage. Another described being forced to remove a custom paint job because it violated aesthetic guidelines. As the pressure mounted, the HOA board began to fracture. Some members, realizing the tide was turning against them, started questioning whether their rigid policies were worth the backlash. Others, including Ms. Carter, dug in deeper, clinging to their belief in absolute control. I, meanwhile, continued building alliances. I partnered with local advocacy groups specializing in property rights and customization, drafting petitions calling for reforms to HOA regulations. Within weeks, thousands of signatures poured in, drawing support from homeowners across the country who had faced similar battles. But the most powerful moment came when Emily Green returned to Willow Creek for a follow-up video. This time, she invited Ms. Carter to participate in a public debate, pitting her against me and other residents who supported customization. The showdown took place at the community center, filling every seat and spilling into overflow rooms. Cameras from local news stations lined the walls, capturing every word exchanged between the two sides. Ms. Carter tried to defend the HOA's stance, citing concerns about property values and uniformity. But I countered each argument with evidence: photos of thriving custom cars, testimonials from families saving money on utilities, and even studies showing how green spaces improved mental health and reduced carbon footprints. When asked about the concrete reasons behind their rules, Ms. Carter stumbled, unable to provide anything beyond vague notions of community standards. By the end of the debate, it was clear that the tide had turned. Even some of Ms. Carter's staunchest supporters began to question whether the HOA's approach was outdated. As the audience erupted in applause, I felt a surge of pride, not just for myself but for everyone who had stood up alongside me. Still, I knew the fight wasn't over yet. The HOA hadn't officially backed down, and there were still fines looming over my head. But for the first time, I felt hopeful. With national attention, growing support, and a strategic plan in place, I believed we could win this battle and inspire others to do the same. The debate at the community center had been a watershed moment for Willow Creek. For years, residents had quietly resented the HOA's iron grip on their lives, but now they had a voice and a leader in me. My calm demeanor, combined with undeniable evidence of the benefits of customization and creativity, had inspired even the most hesitant neighbors to join the cause. But Ms. Carter wasn't ready to surrender just yet. In the days following the debate, she doubled down on her efforts to enforce the HOA's rules. Notices began appearing on doorsteps across the neighborhood, warning homeowners to remove any unapproved modifications or face escalating fines. Some residents received letters threatening legal action if they didn't comply within 48 hours. I saw these tactics for what they were: an act of desperation. The HOA was trying to intimidate people into submission, but I knew better than to let fear dictate my choices. Instead of backing down, I rallied my supporters, organizing a mass protest outside the HOA office. Dozens of families showed up, holding signs that read, "Creativity over conformity," and "Customization is freedom." Parents pushed strollers while kids played near colorful cars parked in defiance, turning the demonstration into a celebration of innovation and self-expression. Local news crews covered the event extensively, capturing footage of children laughing as they posed beside custom-painted vehicles while parents chanted slogans demanding reform. One reporter interviewed a young boy who proudly held up a drawing of a Lamborghini. "This is what dreams look like," he said, grinning. "And we're standing with your name." The protest drew national attention, with major outlets picking up the story. Politicians weighed in, praising my courage and calling for statewide reviews of HOA policies. A state representative even announced plans to introduce legislation protecting homeowners' rights to customize their vehicles, regardless of HOA rules. For the first time, it felt like real change was possible, not just for Willow Creek but for communities everywhere. Meanwhile, the HOA board descended into chaos. Several members resigned, citing personal reasons or moral objections to the crackdown. Others openly criticized Ms. Carter, accusing her of alienating residents and damaging the neighborhood's reputation. By the end of the week, the board was fractured, with no clear leadership or direction. But Ms. Carter still clung to power, determined to salvage her authority. She called another emergency meeting, this time inviting local officials and media to address the controversy. Dressed in her usual suit and tie, she stood before a packed room of reporters and residents, attempting to defend the HOA's stance. "We understand that emotions are running high," she began, her tone measured but strained. "However, the rules exist to maintain property values and ensure uniformity within our community. Allowing exceptions, even seemingly harmless ones, could set a dangerous precedent." Her statement was met with boos and jeers from the crowd. One resident shouted, "Uniformity? Really? Over creativity?" Another chimed in, "Why don't you tell us how much money you've spent suing neighbors instead of supporting individuality?" The chaos escalated until security guards had to escort several angry attendees out of the room. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the HOA's reputation had taken a massive hit. Even longtime supporters were questioning whether the organization had gone too far. Back at home, I watched the live stream of the meeting with a mix of satisfaction and relief. I had started this journey alone, but now I had an entire community standing behind me. Still, I knew the fight wasn't over. The HOA hadn't officially backed down, and there were still fines looming over my head. To keep the momentum going, I launched a crowdfunding campaign to cover legal fees and support other families facing similar battles. Donations poured in from across the country, exceeding my goal within days. Local businesses offered discounts to participants in the custom car revolution movement, while schools invited me to speak to students about creativity and civic engagement. As the weeks passed, the transformation of Willow Creek became undeniable. More and more driveways filled with bold, customized vehicles, Lamborghinis, vintage cars, and eco-friendly hybrids alike. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now exchanged tips on customization and design. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, turning the neighborhood into a true community. But I remained focused on the bigger picture. With the help of advocacy groups and pro bono lawyers, I filed a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority, accusing the HOA of overreach and discrimination against creative expression. I also drafted a proposal for revised guidelines, emphasizing flexibility and inclusivity over rigid conformity. By the time fall arrived, the HOA was forced to acknowledge the shifting tide. Under mounting pressure, they agreed to temporarily suspend enforcement of Article 4, Section 7, the clause banning unapproved vehicle modifications. While they framed the decision as a gesture of goodwill, it was clear to everyone that the rebellion had won. For me, the victory was bittersweet. On one hand, I was thrilled to see my Lamborghini thrive without fear of fines or threats. On the other hand, I missed the simplicity of those early days when owning it had been just about enjoying something beautiful and functional. Still, I understood the importance of what we had accomplished. It's not just about me anymore, I told Alex and Jamie one evening as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. It's about proving that we can make a difference, if we stand together. They nodded, smiling. You've already made a difference. Look at how far we've come. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the scent of blooming flowers, I realized something profound. Change wasn't easy, it required patience, persistence, and courage. But when people came together for a common cause, anything was possible. By winter, Willow Creek was unrecognizable from the cookie-cutter suburb it had once been. The monotony of manicured lawns and uniform vehicles had given way to a vibrant tapestry of creativity and individuality. Backyards were filled with customized cars, Lamborghinis, vintage convertibles, and eco-friendly hybrids, all uniquely painted or modified to reflect their owners' personalities. Neighbors exchanged tips on customization techniques over fences, shared stories about their favorite car projects, and collaborated on community events that celebrated self-expression. It was as if the entire neighborhood had awakened, not just physically but spiritually. For me, the transformation was deeply personal. My Lamborghini, once the center of conflict, had become a symbol of hope and resilience. I no longer feared fines or threats. Instead, I felt pride every time someone stopped to admire my handiwork or ask for advice. What had started as a dream to own something unique had grown into something far greater, a movement that celebrated freedom, creativity, and community. The HOA, meanwhile, underwent its own metamorphosis. Faced with overwhelming public pressure and legal scrutiny, the board voted to dissolve itself, paving the way for a new governing body elected by residents. This time, candidates ran on platforms of transparency, inclusivity, and environmental stewardship. I myself was approached to run, but I declined, preferring to focus on grassroots efforts rather than formal leadership roles. Still, I remained actively involved in shaping Willow Creek's future, working closely with the new board to draft guidelines that prioritized flexibility and collaboration over rigidity and control. One of the most significant changes came in the form of statewide legislation inspired by my fight. The proposed bill, championed by the state representative who had supported my cause, sought to protect homeowners' rights to customize their vehicles, regardless of HOA rules. Dubbed the Customization Freedom Act, it passed unanimously, setting a precedent for communities across the country. Local news outlets hailed me as a hero, and invitations poured in for me to speak at conferences, schools, and advocacy events. But despite the accolades, I stayed grounded. I knew that real change wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about empowering others to make a difference in their own lives. To that end, I launched a nonprofit organization called Wheels of Change, dedicated to promoting property rights and challenging restrictive housing policies. Through workshops, online resources, and community outreach programs, the initiative helped countless families transform their properties into spaces where they could thrive. As spring returned to Willow Creek, I hosted a neighborhood celebration to mark the one-year anniversary of my rebellion. Tables were set up along the street, laden with dishes made from homegrown ingredients and decorated with colorful custom car decals. Musicians performed lively songs on porches, while children ran through sprinklers and painted murals of Lamborghinis and eco-friendly hybrids on sidewalks. At the center of it all stood me, raising a glass of freshly squeezed lemonade in a toast. To Willow Creek, I said, my voice warm but steady. May we always remember that beauty isn't about uniformity, it's about diversity. And may we never forget what happens when we stand together. The crowd erupted in cheers, clinking glasses and applauding. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, not with tension or conformity, but with genuine connection. I glanced around at the smiling faces, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. I had started this fight alone, but I hadn't finished it that way. Together, we had turned a personal battle into a movement for change. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I reflected on everything that had happened. Yes, the road had been long and difficult, but it had also been worth it. Willow Creek may never be perfect, but thanks to my courage and the community's unity, it was on the path to becoming a better, fairer place for everyone. And in that moment, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors, I knew I'd made the right choice. This wasn't just my victory, it belonged to all of them.